The cold contract the rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling. Tech's 42nd floor, as Marcus Sterling signed another acquisition deal worth millions. At 32, he had built his technology empire by viewing everything through the lens of profit and loss, including people. His steel-gray eyes reflected the storm outside as his assistant David knocked and entered. "Sir, the Yamamoto representatives are here for the marriage arrangement meeting," David announced, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus didn't look up from his documents. "Send them to conference room A. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Marriage. The word tasted bitter in his mouth, but it was simply another business transaction. The Japanese investors demanded traditional values, a married CEO, inspired confidence in their conservative culture. One wedding contract would unlock a $3 billion partnership. Meanwhile, across the city in Queens, Alina Rossi knelt beside her grandmother's hospital bed, clutching a stack of unpaid medical bills. At 26, she had devoted her life to teaching kindergarten and caring for Nona Rosa, but the cancer treatments had drained their family's savings. The bakery that had been in their family for 3 generations teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. Elena Karamia, her grandmother, whispered, her weathered hand touching Elena's tear-stained cheek, "There might be another way. Your father received a call about a marriage arrangement. Wealthy family needs a wife for their son. The compensation would save everything." Elena's heart sank. An arranged marriage felt like something from another century, yet desperation makes people consider impossible choices. Her parents had already lost their home. Without help, they'd lose Nona too. That evening, Elena sat in Sterling Tech's intimidating lobby, her simple navy dress a stark contrast to the marble and chrome surroundings. When Marcus finally appeared, she understood why people called him the Ice Prince of Manhattan. Tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored suit, he regarded her with the same detached interest he might show a piece of office furniture. "Alina Rossi?" he stated, rather than asked, his voice devoid of warmth. "I assume you understand the terms? This is a business arrangement lasting 18 months. You'll live in my penthouse, attend required social functions, and maintain the appearance of a devoted wife. In return, your family's debts disappear, and you receive a generous settlement." Elena's hands trembled as she signed the contract that would chain her to a man who clearly viewed her as nothing more than a necessary inconvenience. Marcus didn't even pretend to care about her hopes, dreams, or feelings. As his pen scratched across the paper, she wondered if she had just sold her soul to save everyone she loved. The marriage ceremony took place in a sterile courthouse 3 days later, witnessed only by lawyers and David. Marcus's kiss was brief and cold, sealing a contract rather than celebrating love. As they left the building, Alina caught her reflection in the car window. She looked like a ghost of herself. "The car will take you to collect your belongings," Marcus said, without looking at her. "Be moved in by Sunday." Alina nodded silently, watching the city blur past through tear-filled eyes, wondering how she would survive 18 months with a man who had already made it clear she was nothing more than an expensive, temporary employee. Walls of Acelian's breath caught as the private elevator opened into Marcus's penthouse. The space stretched endlessly before her floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing Manhattan's glittering skyline. Minimalist furniture that looked more like art installations than places to actually sit. And a silence so profound it felt oppressive. Everything was white, black, or chrome, as if color itself had been deemed unprofessional. "Your room is down the hall," Marcus said without ceremony, not bothering to give her a proper tour. "Mrs. Chin handles the household. Breakfast is at 7, sharp if you choose to join me. I leave for work at 7:30. Lena wheeled her single suitcase across the pristine marble floor, feeling like an intruder in a museum. Her assigned bedroom was larger than her family's entire apartment, but just as cold and unwelcoming as the rest of the penthouse. The king-size bed looked like it had never been slept in, and the walk-in closet echoed with emptiness. Mrs. Chen, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, appeared in the doorway with fresh towels. "Welcome, Mrs. Sterling," she said warmly. Though Alina noticed how she glanced nervously toward the living room where Marcus was already buried in his laptop. "Mr. Marcus? He works very hard. Very... focused man." Lena understood the diplomatic pause. Focused was clearly Mrs. Chen's polite way of saying, emotionally unavailable. The first week established their rigid routine. Marcus left each morning before dawn and returned after midnight, treating Alina like an invisible roommate. When forced to acknowledge her presence, he spoke in clipped, professional tones as if she were attending a board meeting rather than sharing his home. Alina tried to bring warmth to the sterile space. She bought flowers for the dining room table, but Marcus had them removed because their scent interfered with his concentration. She attempted cooking dinner one evening, filling the kitchen with the rich aromas of her grandmother's recipe. For ossobuco, but Marcus ate a protein bar at his desk instead, claiming he didn't have time for unnecessary meals. You don't have to live like a monk just because you're successful, Alina said one evening, finding him hunched over financial reports at 10 o'clock. When did you last watch a movie? Read something that wasn't related to business? Take a walk just because the sunset looked pretty? Marcus looked up with genuine confusion, as if she'd suggested he'd take up interpretive dance. Those activities don't generate revenue or advance strategic objectives. They generate happiness, Alina replied softly. Remember that expression? Hardened. Happiness is a luxury I can't afford. Neither can you, given why you're here. The words stung because they were true. Alina retreated to her room, wondering how someone could build such high walls around their heart that even kindness couldn't find a way in. But Alina possessed a stubborn streak inherited from 3 generations of Italian women who had survived wars, immigrations, and heartbreak. She began leaving small notes in places Marcus would find them. Have a good day stuck to his coffee mug. An article about a new art exhibition tucked into his briefcase. A plate of homemade cookies on his desk with a message reading brain food. Marcus threw the notes away without reading them and gave the cookies to Mrs. Chen. But Alina noticed he started drinking his coffee more slowly, as if savoring those few extra moments before his day consumed him entirely. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into their arrangement, when Alina found Marcus standing in the living room at 2 a.m, staring out at the city lights with an expression of such profound loneliness that her heart ached for him. Can't sleep? She asked gently. He didn't turn around. Sleep is inefficient. I can review quarterly projections instead, Alina said, settling onto the couch behind him. You could tell me why a man who has everything looks like he has nothing at all. For just a moment, Marcus's shoulders sagged. Alina glimpsed the vulnerable person hiding beneath the corporate armor. Cracks in the armor, the vulnerability Alina glimpsed that night vanished by morning, replaced by Marcus's familiar mask of cold professionalism. But something had shifted. He no longer immediately discarded her notes, though he pretended not to read them. She caught him once, standing in his office doorway, staring at a small origami crane she'd folded from colorful paper and left on his desk with a message, even in the darkest sky. Something beautiful can take flight. The real change came during Marcus's 4th week of 18-hour workdays, preparing for the Yamamoto deal. Lena woke to find Mrs. Chen pacing the kitchen, wringing her hands with worry. He hasn't eaten in 2 days, Mrs. Chen whispered. Just coffee and those awful energy drinks. And last night I heard him coughing terrible, deep coughs that shake his whole body. Alina found Marcus hunched over his computer, his normally pristine appearance disheveled. His face was flushed with fever, and when he reached for his coffee cup, his hand trembled visibly. You're sick, Alina said, placing her palm against his burning forehead. You need to rest. I need to finish the Tokyo presentation, Marcus rasped, but his voice was barely a whisper. Yamamoto arrives tomorrow morning. David can handle the presentation. You can barely speak. Marcus tried to stand and swayed dangerously. Alina caught his arm, feeling how his powerful frame had become fragile beneath the expensive suit. The first time since their marriage, he didn't pull away from her touch. Against his weak protests, Lena guided him to bed, loosening his tie and helping him out of his jacket. She spent the next 2 days nursing him through a brutal case of pneumonia, bringing him homemade chicken soup, reading aloud from books she found in his unopened boxes, and sitting by his bedside when nightmares made him cry out in his sleep. During his feverish delirium, Marcus revealed fragments of the pain he'd buried so deep. He spoke of a younger brother who died in a car accident while Marcus was working late, missing their dinner plans. He whispered about parents who'd love their money more than their son, chipping him off to boarding school at age 8 and treating his achievements like stock reports. "I couldn't save Tommy," he mumbled against Elena's shoulder as she held him through a particularly bad night. "If I'd just... if I'd been there instead of chasing another deal." Elena soothed, stroking his hair. "It wasn't your fault." When the fever finally broke, Marcus woke to find Elena asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still resting protectively on his arm. Sunlight streamed through windows she'd opened to let fresh air replace the sterile, climate-controlled atmosphere he preferred. The room smelled like the lavender tea she'd been brewing for him. He could hear her humming softly in her sleep a lullaby that sounded like home. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something besides the crushing weight of responsibility, an ambition he felt cared for. Over the following weeks, the walls Marcus had built around his heart developed hairline fractures. He began leaving his office door open so he could hear Elena moving through the penthouse, bringing life to spaces that had been museums. When she cooked, he found excuses to work in the kitchen, pretending to review emails while actually watching her dance around the stove, tasting sauces and humming Italian songs her grandmother had taught her. "Tell me about Nonna Rosa," Marcus said one evening, surprising them both with a personal question. Elena's face lit up as she described her grandmother's stories of immigrating from Sicily with nothing but recipes and determination. She spoke of Sunday dinners where the whole neighborhood gathered in their tiny apartment, of how Nonna could cure any heartbreak with the right combination of pasta and wisdom. "She sounds remarkable," Marcus said quietly. "I'd like to meet her." "Duh." Offer stunned Elena. "Really? Really?" Marcus hesitated, then added, "I never had grandparents, or family dinners, or anyone who cared if I came home." Elena reached across the space between them and took his hand. This time Marcus didn't pull away, but their growing connection was about to face its greatest test. James Morrison, Marcus's most ruthless competitor, had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike at Sterling Tech's heart, and he'd just found his weapon, the storm. Breaks the morning started like any other, with Marcus leaving early for a crucial meeting with the Yamamoto executives. He paused at the door, something he'd never done before. Their marriage, and Elena looked up from her coffee in surprise. "I should be back by 6, he said, his tone softer than usual. "Maybe we could have dinner together tonight?" Elena's smile could have powered the entire building. It liked that very much. It was the first time Marcus had initiated spending time together, and Elena hummed happily as she planned a special meal. She decided to visit the small Italian market in Little Italy to get fresh ingredients, a trip that would change everything. James Morrison had been watching the Sterling penthouse for weeks, studying Elena's routines with predatory patience. The 45-year-old CEO of Morrison Industries had built his empire by destroying others, and Marcus Sterling represented his greatest challenge yet. The Yamamoto deal would catapult Sterling Tech beyond Morrison's reach forever unless he found a way to destroy Marcus first. Elena's solo shopping trip provided the perfect opportunity. She was selecting tomatoes when 2 men in dark suits approached from either side. "Mrs. Sterling," the taller one said politely. "Mr. Morrison would like a word." Before Elena could scream, a cloth covered her nose and mouth. The market's security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned at that exact moment, and witnesses later described seeing a woman who appeared ill being helped to a car by concerned friends. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in Sterling Tech's conference room, trying to focus on profit projections, while his mind kept drifting to Elena's excited smile that morning. The Yamamoto representatives nodded approvingly at his quarterly reports, but something felt wrong. Couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Beautiful wife you have. Shame if something happened to her." Marcus's blood turned to ice. He excused himself from the meeting, calling Elena's phone repeatedly as David frantically tried to trace the message. When Mrs. Chen called to report that Elena hadn't returned from shopping, Marcus felt a terror he'd never experienced, not when his parents died, not when his brother's accident happened, not during any business crisis. This was different. This was Elena. The second message arrived an hour later with a photo of Elena tied to a chair, in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Her eyes were wide with fear but defiant, and Marcus could see a small cut on her lip where she'd apparently fought her captors. Withdraw from the Yamamoto deal and transfer your AI patents to Morrison Industries. You have until midnight, or your lovely wife disappears permanently. Marcus stared at the message, his hands shaking with a rage so pure it frightened him. James Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd threatened the one person Marcus would sacrifice everything to protect. Sir David stood in the doorway, pale with worry. The police are here and I've contacted our security team. No police, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. This is personal. Detective Rivera, however, had already begun investigating Elena's disappearance. She'd seen too many cases where pride and revenge turned deadly. She wasn't about to let a civilian get hurt because of corporate warfare. As night fell, Marcus stood in his empty penthouse, staring at the origami crane Elena had made for him. For 18 months, he'd thought of their marriage as a temporary business arrangement. Now, faced with losing her forever, he realized the truth that had been growing in his heart. Elena hadn't just brought warmth to his home, she'd brought light to his soul. He'd spent his entire adult life building walls to protect himself from caring too much, working too hard to avoid the pain of connection. But Elena had slipped through every defense, filling the hollow spaces in his heart with laughter, kindness, and a love he'd never believed he deserved. Morrison wanted his business empire. He could have it. The patents, the deals, even Sterling. Tech itself, none of it meant anything without Elena. Marcus picked up his phone and began making calls. Not to lawyers or security teams, but to people who owed him favors in places Morrison would never expect. If James Morrison wanted to play dirty, Marcus would show him what real ruthlessness looked like when it was fueled by love instead of greed. In the warehouse across town, Elena sat bound but unbroken, whispering prayers for Marcus's safety. She knew her husband well enough by now to know he'd move heaven and earth to find her hand that terrified her more than her own captivity. Morrison was counting on Marcus's feelings for her, using love as a weapon, but Elena had learned something about Marcus during their months together. Beneath his cold exterior burned a fire that could consume everything in its path when the people he cared about were threatened. The final confrontation was about to begin. Love conquers all. The abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn's industrial district had been Morrison's perfect choice. Isolated, with multiple escape routes, and far from prying eyes. But James Morrison had underestimated the network Marcus had built. Over 15 years of business dealings, every favor owed, every connection made, every piece of information gathered came together in a coordinated effort that would have impressed military strategist. Elena had been captive for 8 hours. When she heard the distant sound of sirens, her heart raced not with hope, but with terror that Marcus had walked into Morrison's trap. She'd spent those hours working at the zip ties binding her wrists, using a technique her self-defense instructor had taught her, managing to loosen them just enough to slip one hand free. The warehouse doors burst open simultaneously from 3 directions. Detective Rivera led the official police response from the front, while Marcus's private security team, ex-military specialists who'd worked in corporate espionage, entered from the rear. But it was Marcus himself who appeared from the side entrance, moving with deadly purpose toward the office where Morrison held Elena. "Let her go," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the empty space. "You want to destroy me? Fine. But Elena is innocent in this." Morrison emerged from the shadows, dragging Elena with him, a gun pressed to her temple. Up close, he looked older than his 45 years, worn down by decades of cutthroat competition and hollow victories. "Innocent?" Morrison laughed bitterly. "She's your weakness, Sterling. It's the crack in your perfect armor. Transfer the patents, withdraw from Yamamoto, and she lives. Choose your empire over her, and you'll learn what real loss feels like." Elena met Marcus's eyes across the warehouse floor. Even in this terrifying moment, she saw something in his gaze that made her heart soar, the calculating look of a businessman weighing options, but the desperate love of a man who'd finally learned what truly mattered. "I choose her," Marcus said without hesitation. I choose Alina. The patents are yours. The deal is off. Take everything's just. Let her go. Morrison's triumph lasted exactly 3 seconds. Alina, her hand now free, drove her elbow into his ribs while simultaneously grabbing his gun arm. Years of teaching kindergarten had given her reflexes for handling unpredictable situations, and she used every ounce of strength to twist away from him. The gun went off, the bullet embedding harmlessly in the warehouse ceiling as Detective Rivera and her team swarmed Morrison. Marcus reached Alina in seconds, gathering her into his arms as she collapsed against him. Shaking with adrenaline and relief, "I'm sorry, Marcus," whispered into her hair, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry I let this happen. I should have protected you better." "You did protect me," Alina said, pulling back to look at his face. "You were willing to give up everything for me?" "Because you are everything," Marcus replied. And for the first time since she'd known him, his voice broke with emotion. "I love you, Alina. Not as part of some contract or arrangement. I love you with everything I am." The confession she'd dreamed of hearing came in the worst possible circumstances, but Alina had never heard anything more beautiful. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you since that first night when you looked so lost staring out at the city." Later, they stood in the same church where Elena's parents had married 30 years earlier. This time, Marcus wore a smile instead of his usual mask of indifference. And Elena's dress was white silk chosen for joy rather than navy blue selected for resignation. The guest list included Mrs. Chen, who cried through the entire ceremony, Elena's entire extended family, and even some of Marcus's business associates who'd never seen their ruthless colleague look genuinely happy. Nona Rosa, recovered from her treatments thanks to Marcus's quiet generosity, gave a toast in Italian that had everyone laughing despite not understanding the words. Marcus had restructured Sterling Tech, promoting David to handle more daily operations while he focused on innovation rather than domination. He'd also started a foundation providing small business loans to struggling families. Elena's influence making him see success as something to be shared rather than hoarded. "Any regrets?" Elena asked as they danced to their first song as a truly married couple. Marcus spun her gently, marveling at how this woman had transformed his sterile world into something warm and beautiful. The penthouse now overflowed with Elena's touches, family photos, fresh flowers, the lingering scent of Sunday dinners, and most importantly, the sound of laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. "Just one," Marcus said, pulling her closer. "I regret it took me so long to realize that the best business decision I ever made was falling in love with my wife." Alina stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, tasting happiness and the promise of a future filled with warmth. Instead of walls, around them, their families celebrated. But in that moment, they only had eyes for each other, two people who'd learned that sometimes the most unexpected arrangements could bloom into the most beautiful love stories. The contract that had brought them together was filed away in some lawyer's office, forgotten and irrelevant. What bound them now was something no legal document could contain: a love that had conquered fear, pride, and the belief that successful people had to choose between ambition and happiness. Marcus Sterling had built an empire, but Alina Rossi had given him a home.